up, YouTuber? uh, I know some people don't like this, but you know, I really have to return the book. So, and then like I had to wait for it when I ordered it from the library. So I really want to like finish it because it's really a good book, and it's The Art of Racing in the Rain. The dog's name is Enzo. We're at chapter 17, where they're just it's really it's like the dog is just telling the story of his existence, and he'll watch TV. This dog in particular was a yellow, golden retriever. Hi, King of Ipswich. Hello, hello. You miss Zoe? Zoe's the little girl, which I had a cat named Zoe for 18 years. Hi, King of Ipswich, Mr. Rourke. So I just want to, the book is a good book, and if you like dogs, and if you have one, you'll probably never think of them as the same because this makes you really think that the dog is really telling the story. So the wife is sick right now, but she hasn't been diagnosed. But things are just about to take a different turn. Uh, Danny likes to race. He's hoping to become a race car driver. Zoe is her daughter, and Enzo is the dog. So I'm sorry. It's called The Art of Racing in the Rain. It is by Garth Stein. Great. Awesome. This story is told by the eyes of the dog. The dog is telling the story. He watches TV when his owner is gone and learns a lot of stuff, and he's got his favorite actors and all this shit. He just, he thinks he's the best dog he can be in this life and he'll come back as a person. Really great. He uses a lot of racing metaphors, like for symbolism of life in general, too. Okay, so chapter 17 of The Art of Racing in the Rain, Garth Stein. Your eyes go. I'm sorry. Start over. Chapter 17. Your car goes where your eyes go. Two pit bulls, huh? Well, pit bulls are great. We went to Denny Creek, not because it was named after Denny. It wasn't. But because it was such an enjoyable hike. Zoe clumping along in her first pair of waffle stompers, me cut loose of my leash. Summer in the Cascades is always pleasant, cool under a canopy of cedars, the beaten path backpack down, making long strides, off the beaten path, where dogs prefer, a soft and spongy bed of fallen needles that rot and feed the trees with a steady trickle of nutrients. And the smell. The smell would have given me an erection if I'd still had testicles. Richness, remember, this is by the dog. Richness and fertility, growth and death and food and decay. Waiting, just waiting for someone to smell it. Lingering close to the ground in layers, each distinct scent with its own. Oh, you both put it at the same time. That's cute. With its own aromatic weight, its own place. A good nose like mine can separate each odor, identify, enjoy. I rarely let myself go, practicing to be restrained like men are. But that summer, considering the joy of all that we had, Denny's success and Zoe's exuberance, and even Eve, who was light and free, I ran through those woods that day wildly, like a crazy dog, diving through the bushes, over the fallen trees, giving gentle chase to chipmunks, barking at the blue jays, rolling over and scratching my back on the sticks and leaves and needles and earth. We made our way along the path, up the hills and down, over the roots and past the rock outcroppings, eventually arriving at the slippery slabs, as they are called, where the creek runs over a series of broad, flat rocks, pooling at some point, streaming at others. Children love the slippery slabs, as they slide and slice through. Zoe arrived, and I drank water, cold and fresh. The last of that year's snow melt. Zoe and Denny and Eve stripped down to their swimsuits and bathed gently in the waters. Zoe was old enough to safely navigate parts by herself, and Denny took the lower and Eve took the upper, and they slid Zoe down the stream of water, Eve giving a push and Zoe slipping down. The rocks had traction when dry, but when wet, there was a film on them that made them quite slick. Down she would go, splashing into the frigid pool at Denny's feet. He would snatch her up and whisk her back to Eve, who would slide her down again and again. People, like dogs, love repetition, chasing a ball, lapping a course in a race car, sliding down a slide, because as much as each incident is similar, so it is different. Denny rushed up the slab and handed off Zoe. He returned to his spot by the pool. Eve lowered Zoe into the water. She screamed and flung herself in play, slid down the slab to be caught by Denny again, until once Eve dipped Zoe into the water, but instead of screaming and splashing, Zoe pulled her toes from the icy water, upsetting Eve's balance. Eve shifted her weight. Now remember, Eve is the wife, and that's the one that the dog can smell her disease, but he's so frustrated because he can't tell her. Eve shifted her weight and somehow managed to release. Thank you, Mr. Rourke. I appreciate that. Her foot touched the creek, and she didn't realize how slippery those rocks were, like glass. Her legs went out from underneath her. She reached out, but her hand grasped only to the air. Her fist closed, empty. Her head hit the rock with such a loud crack and bounce. It hit and bounced and hit again, like a rubber ball. We stood, it seemed like for a long time, waiting to see what was going to happen. Eve lay unmoving, and there was Zoe again, the cause, not knowing what to do. She looked at her father, who quickly bounded up to them both. Are you okay? Eve blinked hard and painfully. There was blood in her mouth. I bit my tongue, she said woozily. How's your head? Denny asked. It hurt. Can you make it back to the car? With me in the lead, hurting Zoe, Denny steered Eve. She wasn't staggering, but she was lost, and who knows where she would have ended up if someone hadn't been with her. It was early evening when we got to the hospital in Bellevue. You probably have a minor concussion, Denny said, but they should check it out. I'm okay, Eve repeated over and over, but clearly she wasn't okay. She was dazed and slurring her words, and she kept nodding off, but Denny would wake her up, saying something about not falling asleep when you have a concussion. They all went inside and left me in the car with the windows open a crack. I settled into the pocket-like passenger seat of Denny's BMW 3.0 BSI and forced myself to sleep. When I sleep, I don't feel the urge to urinate nearly as badly as when I'm awake. Okay. Chapter 18. In Mongolia, when a dog dies, he is buried high in the hills, so people cannot walk on his grave. The dog's master whispers into the dog's ear his wishes that the dog will return as a man in his next life. Then his tail is cut off and put beneath his head, and a piece of meat or fat is placed in his mouth to sustain his soul on its journey before he is reincarnated. The dog's soul is freed to travel the land, to run across the high desert plains for as long as it would like. I learned that from a program on the National Geographic Channel, so I believe it's true. Not all dogs return as men. They say only those who are ready. I am ready. Chapter 19. It was hours before Denny returned, and he returned alone. He let me out, and I barely could scramble from the seat before unleashing a torrent of urine on the lamppost in front of me. Sorry, boy, he said. I didn't forget about you. When I had finished, he opened a package of peanut butter sandwich crackers he must have gotten from a machine. I love those crackers the best. It's the salt and the butter in the crackers mixed with the fat and the peanuts. I tried to eat slowly, savoring each bite, but I was too hungry and swallowed them so quickly I barely got to taste them. Yeah, it was. What a shame to waste something so wonderful on a dog. Sometimes I hate when I am so much. We sat on the parking step there for quite a long time, not speaking or anything. He seemed upset, and when he was upset, I knew the best thing I could do was be available for him. So I lay next to him and waited. Parking lots are weird places. People love their cars so much when they are moving, but they hurry away from them so quickly when they stop moving. People are loath to sit in a parked car for long. They are afraid someone might judge them for it, I think. The only people who sit in parked cars are police and stalkers, and sometimes taxi drivers on break, but usually only when they're eating. Whereas me, I can sit in a parked car for hours and nobody thinks to ask. Odd, I could be a stalker dog, and then what would happen? But in that hospital parking lot, with its very black blacktop, warm like a sweater just removed, and its very white lines painted with surgical care, people parked their cars and ran from them, sprinted into the building, or scurried out of the building and into their cars, quick to drive away, with no mirror adjustment, no assessment of gauges, like a getaway car. Denny and I sat at length and watched them. I know, right? A stalker dog. He is a funny dog. He's a funny dog. Uno momento, por favor. Okay. Uh, Denny and I sat at length. Hi, Sean Mac. I'm just reading. I'm trying to get through this book, The Art of Racing in the Rain, because I got to return it. So I'm on chapter 19. All told from the eyes of the dog. There was just an accident. Eve fell. She slipped, and she's at the hospital. And so Denny and I sat at length and watched them, the comers and the goers, and did nothing more than breathe. We did not need conversation to communicate with each other. After a while, remember it's the dog talk. A car pulled into the parking lot and parked near us. It was a beautiful 1974 Alfa Romeo GTV in pine green with a factory installed fabric sunroof in mint condition. Mike got out and walked slowly towards us. I greeted him, and he gave me the perfunctory pat on the head. He continued over to Denny and sat down in my spot at the burn. I tried to muster some joy because the mood was definitely down, but Mike pushed me away when I went to nuzzle him. I appreciate this, Mike, Denny said. Hey, man, no problem. What about Zoe? Eve's dad took her to her house. Eve's dad took her to their house and put her to bed. Mike nodded. The crickets were louder than the traffic from the nearby Interstate 405, but not by much. We listened to them, a concert of crickets, wind, leaves, cars, and fans on the roof of the hospital building. Here's why I will be a good person. The dog is saying it. Because I listen. I cannot speak, so I listen very well. I never interrupt. I never deflect the course of the conversation with a comment of my own. People, if you pay attention to them, change the direction of one another's conversations constantly. It's like having a passenger in your car who suddenly grabs the steering wheel and turns you down a side street. For instance, if we met at a party and I wanted to tell you a story about the time I needed to get a soccer ball in my neighbor's yard, but his dog chased me and I had to jump into a swimming pool to escape, and I began telling the story, you hearing the words soccer and neighbor in the same sentence might interrupt and mention that your childhood neighbor was Pele, the famous soccer player. And I might be courteous and say, didn't he play for the Cosmos of New York? Did you grow up in New York? And you might reply that no, you grew up in Brazil on the streets of. Craig Caracas with Pele, and I might say, I thought you were from Tennessee, and you might say, not originally, and then go on to outline your genealogy at length. So, my initial conversation that I had a funny story about being chased by my neighbor's dog would be totally lost, and only because you had to tell me all about Pele. Learn to listen, I beg of you. Pretend you are a dog like me and listen to other people rather than steal their stories. That's good advice. I'll have to try to remember that myself. I listened that night, and I heard. How long will they keep her? Mike asked. They might not even do a biopsy. They might just go in and get it. Malignant or not, it's still causing problems. The headache. Hi, Ben. It is, right, Mr. Rourke? I'm just reading about Art of Racing in the Rain, the book, and we're in chapter 19 where Eve just slipped her head and they just discovered the tumor in her brain. Malignant or not, it's still causing problems. The headache, the nausea, the mood swings. Really? Mike said. Mood swings? Maybe my wife has a tumor. It was a joke line, a throwaway, but Denny didn't have a sense of humor that night. He said sharply, It's not a tumor, Mike. It's a mass. It's not a tumor until they test it. Sorry, Mike said. I was sorry. Remember, it's all told by the dog. He grabbed me by the scruff and gave me a shake. Really rough, he said. I'd be freaking out right now if I were you. Denny stood up tall for him. He wasn't a tall guy. He was a Formula One guy, well proportioned and powerful, but scaled down, a flyweight. I am freaking out, he said. Mike nodded thoughtfully. You don't look it. I guess that's why you're such a good driver, he said. And I looked at him quickly. That was just what I was thinking. You don't mind stopping by my place and getting his stuff? Denny took out his key ring and picked through the bundle. The food is in the pantry. Give him a cup and a half. He gets 3 of those chicken cookies before he goes to bed. Take his bed. It's in the bedroom. And take his dog. Just say, Where's your dog? And he'll find it. Sometimes he hides it. He found the house key and held it out for Mike, letting the other keys dangle. It's the same for both locks, he said. We'll be fine, Mike said. Do you want me to bring you some clothes back? No, Denny said. I'll go back in the morning and pack a bag if we're staying. Do you want me to bring these keys back? I have Eve's inside. No words then. Just crickets, wind, traffic, fans blowing on the roof, a distant siren. You don't have to keep it inside, Mike said. You can let it go. We're in a parking lot. Denny looked down at his shoes, the same old 3/4 boots he liked to hike in. He wanted a new pair. I knew because he told me, but he didn't want to spend the money. Uh, hold on. I'm trying to plug my charger in. Hold on. Ah, fuck. Damn. Sorry. So sorry. Hold on. Or as I like to say, uno momento, por favor. All right. I think he was holding out hope that someone would give him a pair of boots for Christmas or his birthday or something, but no one ever did. He had 100 pairs of driving gloves, but no one ever thought to give him a new pair of hiking boots. I listened. He looked up at Mike. This is why she didn't want to go to the hospital. What? Mike asked. This is what she was afraid of. Mike nodded, but clearly he didn't understand what Denny was saying. What about your race next week? He asked. I'll call Johnny tomorrow and tell him I'm out for the season, Denny said. I have to be here. Mike took me to our house to get letting the dogs talk, okay? Where's your dog? He said. I was humiliated. I didn't want to admit that I still slept with a stuffed animal, but I do. I love that dog, and Denny was right. I do hide it during the day because I don't want Zoe to assimilate it into her collection. And also because when people saw it, they wanted to play tug, and I don't like playing tug with my dog. I don't like tugging my dog. And also, I was afraid of the virus. I think he's talking about like Eve's sickness, you know? But I got my dog out of his hiding spot under the sofa, and we climbed back into Mike's car and went to his house. His wife, who wasn't really a wife, but a man who was wife-like, asked how it all went, and Mike brushed him off right away and poured himself a drink. That guy is bottled so tight, Mike said. He's going to have an aneurysm or something. Mike's wife picked up my dog that I had dropped on the floor. We had to take this too, he asked. Listen, Mike sighed. Everyone needs a security blanket. What's wrong with that? It stinks, Mike's wife said. I'll wash it. And he put it in the washing machine. My dog. He took the first toy that Denny ever gave me and stuck it into the washing machine with soap. I couldn't believe it. I was stunned. No one had ever handled my dog in such a way. You know, the dog is talking about, I'm not talking about my dog being in the washing machine. Oh. I watched through the glass window of the machine as it spun around and around, sloshing with the suds. I watched it and they laughed at me. Not meanly. They thought I was a dumb dog. All people do. They laughed and I watched. And when it came out, they put it in the dryer with a towel. And I waited. And when it was dry, they took it out and gave it to me. Tony, Mike's wife, took it out and it was warm. And he handed it to me and said, much better, right? I wanted to hate him then. I wanted to hate the world. I wanted to hate my own dog, a goofy stuffed animal that Denny gave me when I was just a puppy. I was so angry with how our family had suddenly been torn apart. Zoe stuck with the twins. Remember that he refers to Eve's parents as the twins. Eve sick in a hospital, me shuttled off like a foster child, and now my dog washed clean of smell. I wanted to push everyone away and go live by myself with my ancestors on the high desert plains of Mongolia and guard the sheep from the wolves. When Tony handed me my dog, I took it in my mouth out of respect. I took it to my bed because that's what Denny would have wanted me to do, and I curled up with it. And the irony, I liked it. I liked my stuffed dog better clean than smelly, which was something I never would have imagined, it gave me something I could hold on to. Some belief that the center of our family could not be fractured by a chance occurrence, an accidental washing, an unexpected illness. Deep in the kernel of our family existed a bond. Denny, Zoe, Eve, me, and even my stuffed dog. However things might change around us, we would always be together. All right. If anybody wants me to go on to chapter 20, give me a thumbs up. I'm going to get a drink. I'll be right back. Come on, Zucker. Hold on. Thumbs me up in the chat, or give me some kind of a sign if you want me to go to 20. Okay? Oh, cool. Hi. Oh, good, you guys. Oh, thank you so much. All right. Let me just grab something to drink. Hold on 1 second. All right, I'm back. Yay. All right, good. All right. Good to see you guys. Dark Light, King of Ipswich, Ben, Rourke, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate this because I really love this book. Chapter 20. Remember, it's told from the eyes of the dog. I was not privy to much, being a dog. I was not allowed into the hospitals to hear the hushed conversations, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the analysis, to witness the doctor with the blue hat and the blue gown whispering his misgivings, revealing the clues they all should have seen, unraveling the mysteries of the brain. No one confided in me. I was never consulted. Nothing was expected of me except that I do my business outside when called upon to do so, and that I stop barking when told to stop barking. Eve stayed in the hospital for a long time, weeks, because there was so much for Denny to do, caring for both me and Zoe, as well as visiting Eve in the hospital whenever possible. He decided that the best plan was to implement a template system rather than our usual spontaneous way of living. Whereas before, he and Eve sometimes took Zoe to dinner at a restaurant, without Eve, we always ate at home. Whereas before, Denny sometimes fed Zoe breakfast at a coffee shop, without Eve, breakfast was always eaten at home. The days consisted of a series of regimented events. Zoe ate her cereal, while Denny made her a sack lunch consisting of peanut butter and banana sandwich on whole grain bread, potato chips, the good cookies, and a small bottle of water. Denny then dropped Zoe off at her summer camp and continued on to work. At the end of the workday, Denny retrieved Zoe from camp and returned home to cook dinner while Zoe watched cartoons. Okay, so forth, his, schedule. Weekends were spent largely at the hospital. Hi, Dominic. Yeah, we're just reading. They just finally discovered that Eve has a mass in her brain. Weekends were spent largely at the hospital. It was not a very colorful way to live, but it was efficient. And considering the seriousness of Eve's illness, thank you. Okay, I'm losing myself here. Efficient was the best we could expect. My walks were good talking with that inflection. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, here we go. My walks were infrequent. My trips to the dog park non-existent. Little attention was paid to me by Denny or Zoe, but I was ready to make that sacrifice in the interest of Eve's well-being and to preserve the family dynamic. I vowed not to be a squeaky wheel in any way. After 2 weeks of this pattern, Maxwell and Trish, that's Eve's parents, and the dog refers to them as the twins, offered to keep Zoe for a weekend so as to afford Denny a bit of respite. They told him he looked sickly, that he should take a vacation from his troubles, and Eve agreed. I don't want to see you this weekend, she said to him. At least that's what he told Zoe and me. Denny was ambivalent about the idea. I could tell as he packed Zoe's overnight bag. He was hesitant to let Zoe go, but he did let her go. And then he and I were alone, and it felt very strange. We did all the things we used to do. We went jogging. We ordered delivery pizza for lunch. We spent the afternoon watching the fantastic movie Le Mans, in which Steve McQueen endures tragedy and pain in the ultimate test of courage and personal fortitude. We watched one of Denny's tapes featuring an onboard view of the Grand Nürburgring, whatever, racetrack in Germany, filmed in the track's heyday when the likes of Jackie Stewart and Jim Clark raced its lengthy 22-kilometer, 174 turn north-south or northern loop. After that, Denny took me to the Blue Dog Park that was a few blocks away, and he threw the ball for me. But even for that venture, our energy was wrong. A dog with a darkness about him got after me and was at my throat, with bared teeth everywhere I moved. So I couldn't retrieve the tennis ball, but was forced to stay close by Denny's side. Mean dog, right? It all felt wrong. The absence of Eve and Zoe was wrong. There was something missing in everything we did. After we had both eaten dinner, we sat together in the kitchen, fidgeting. There was nothing for us to do but fidget, because while we were going through the motions, doing what we always used to do, there was no joy in it whatsoever. Finally, Denny stood. He took me outside and I urinated for him. He gave me my usual bedtime cookies, and then he said to me, "You be good. I have to go see her." I followed him to the door. I wanted to go see her too. "No," he said to me, "you stay here. They won't let you into the hospital." I understood. I went to my bed and lay down. "Thanks, Enzo," he said, and then he left. He returned a few hours later in the darkness, and he silently climbed into his bed with a shiver before the sheets got warm. I lifted my head, and he saw me. "She's going to be okay," he said to me. "She's going to be okay." Chapter 21. She made me wear the bumblebee wings she had worn the previous Halloween. She dressed herself in her pink ballet outfit with the tutu skirt and the leotard and stockings. We went out into the backyard and ran around together until her pink feet were stained with dirt. Zoe and me playing in the backyard on a sunny afternoon. It was the Tuesday after her weekend with Maxwell and Trish, and by then she had thankfully lost the sour vinegar smell that clung to her whenever she spent time at their house. He doesn't like them ever since they gave him the pepperoncini. Denny had left work early and picked up Zoe so they could go shopping for new sneakers and socks. When they got home, Denny cleaned the house while Zoe and I played. We danced and laughed and ran and pretended we were angels. She called me over to the corner of the yard by the spigot. On the wood chip lay one of her Barbie dolls. She kneeled down before it. "You're going to be okay," she said to the doll. "Everything is going to be okay." She unfolded a dishcloth that she'd brought from the house. In the dishcloth were scissors, a Sharpie pen, and masking tape. She pulled off the doll's head. She took the kitchen scissors and cut off Barbie's hair down to the plastic nub. Then she drew a line on the doll's skull, all the while whispering softly, "Everything's going to be okay." When she was done, she tore off a piece of masking tape and put it on the doll's head. She pressed the head back onto the neck stub and laid the doll down. We both stared at it a moment of silence. "Now she can go to heaven," Zoe said to me, "and I'll live with Grandma and Grandpa." Ooh. I was disheartened. Clearly, the weekend of respite Maxwell and Trish had offered Denny was a false one. I had no clear evidence, and yet I could sense it. For the twins, it had been a working weekend, an effort to establish an agenda. They were already sowing the seeds of their story, spinning the yarn of their propaganda, prophesying a future they hoped would come true. See that? They're trying to talk they're telling the little girl the mother is going to die and then she's going to go live with them. That's what her grandparents are doing. Isn't that rotten? I can't believe that shit. That's why. Poor little girl. Poor Denny, too, and poor Enzo, and poor Eve. It's all sad, right? But, it's a book about, life and the dog and what you think, you know? Well, but whatever. Anyway, chapter 22. Soon Labor Day weekend came, and after that, Zoe was enrolled in school. See, that must frustrate the dog too. Like when he hears something like that and he knows what the plan is of Eve's parents, but he can't tell Denny because he can't talk. And just like how he couldn't tell them about Eve, being sick. Came and went. Yeah, okay, it is sad. Soon Labor Day weekend came, and after that, Zoe was enrolled in school, real school, as she called it, kindergarten, and she was so excited to go. She picked out her clothes the night before her first day, bell-bottom jeans and sneakers, and a bright yellow blouse. She had her backpack, her lunchbox, her pencil case, her notebook. With great ceremony, Denny and I walked her a block from our house to the corner of Martin Luther King Jr. Way, and we waited for the bus that would take her to the new elementary school. We waited with a few other kids and parents from the neighborhood. When the bus came over the hill, we were all so excited. Kiss me now, she said to Denny. Now? Not when the bus is here. I don't want Jessie to see. Jessie was her best friend from preschool who was going to be in the same kindergarten class. Denny obliged and kissed her before the bus had stopped. After school, you go to extended day, he said, like we practiced yesterday at orientation. Remember? I just gotta say, it's so weird to just read that. I had forgotten about that Jessie was her best friend from preschool. And that was my daughter's best friend, Jessie. There's so many weird coincidences with this book and my daughter and stuff. That's just so strange. Daddy, she scolded, I'll pick you up after extended day. You wait in the classroom and I'll come and get you. Daddy, she made a stern face at him, and for a second I could have sworn she was Eve. The flashing eyes, the flared nostrils, the balanced stance and arms, the head cocked, ready for battle. She quickly turned and climbed onto the bus, and as she walked down the aisle, she turned and waved at us both before she took her seat next to her friend. The bus pulled away and headed for school. Your first? Another father asked Denny. Yeah, Denny replied. My only. You? My third, the man said. But there's nothing like your first. They grow up so fast. That they do, Denny said with a smile. We turned and walked home. One of the reasons I like this book is because of the short chapters. It seems to, quicker to get by, get through. Uh, Chapter 23. Everything they said made sense, but none of it added up properly in my mind. It was an evening on which Denny took me along to the hospital to visit Eve, though I didn't get to go inside. After the visit, Zoe and I waited in the car while Maxwell and Trish joined Denny for a conference on the pavement. Zoe was immersed in a book of mazes, something she loved to do. I listened carefully to the conversation. Maxwell and Trish did all of the talking. The dog cracks me up because he's right on it. Of course, there has to be a nurse on duty around the clock. They work in shifts. They work in shifts, but still, the one on duty takes breaks. So someone needs to be there to help. And since we're always around, we have nowhere to go and you have to work, so it's best. Yes, it's best. Denny nodded without conviction. He got into the car and we drove off. Oh, all right, Dominic. Well, want to leave it on and listen, you're more than welcome. But if not, enjoy your dinner. I know, right? I always feel like the dog really did write the book. I get lost. Thank you. I appreciate that, Dominic. Don't get the thumbs up. Mm-hmm. Show some love. So Denny gets in the car and they drive off. So I guess he's just agreed to let that. Well, you'll hear. When's mommy coming home? Zoe asked. Soon, Denny said. We were crossing the floating bridge, the one Zoe used to call the High 90 when she was younger. Mommy's going to go stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, Denny said, until she feels better. Is that okay with you? Hi there. All right, Dominic. Thank you. I appreciate it. Adair, I'm reading the book that you like. I hope everybody likes. They found out that Eve had something wrong, and so she's in the hospital, but now she's going to stay with her parents. Okay. Mommy's going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while until she feels better. Is that okay with you? I guess, Zoe said. Why? Remember, it's told from the eyes of the dog. It'll be easier for. He broke off. It'll be easier. A few days later, a Saturday, Zoe, Denny, and I went to Maxwell and Tricia's house. A bed had been set up in the living room, a large hospital bed that moved up and down and tilted and did all sorts of things by touching a remote control. And that had a broad footboard from which hung a clipboard, and that came stocked with a nurse, a crinkly older woman who had a voice that sounded like she was singing whenever she spoke and who didn't like dogs, though I had no objection to her whatsoever. Immediately, the nurse started fretting about me. To my dismay, Maxwell concurred and Denny was preoccupied, so I was shoved outside into the backyard. Thankfully, Zoe came to my rescue. Mommy's coming, Zoe told me. She was very excited and wore the dress that she liked because it was so pretty, and I found her excitement infectious, so I joined in with it. I embraced the festivity, a real homecoming. Zoe and I played. She threw a ball for me, and I did tricks for her, and we rolled together in the grass. It was a wonderful day. The family all together again. It felt very special. She's here, Denny called from the back door, and Zoe and I rushed to see. This time I was allowed inside. Eve's mother entered the house first, followed by a man in blue slacks and a yellow shirt with a logo on it, who wheeled in a white figure with dead eyes, a mannequin in slippers. Maxwell and Denny lifted the figure and placed it in the bed, and the nurse tucked it in, and Zoe said, Hi, Mommy. And all this happened before it even entered my consciousness that this strange figure was not a dummy, not a mock up used for practice, but Eve. Her head was covered with a stocking cap, her cheeks were sunken, her skin was sallow. She lifted her head and looked around. I feel like a Christmas tree, she said, in the living room. Everyone standing around me expecting something. I don't have any presents. Uncomfortable chuckles from the onlookers. And then she looked at me directly. Enzo, she said, come here. I wagged my tail and approached cautiously. I hadn't seen her since she went into the hospital, and I wasn't prepared for what I saw. It seemed to me the hospital had made her much sicker than she really was. She doesn't know what to think, Denny said for me. It's okay, Enzo, she said. She dangled her hand off the side of the bed, and I bumped it with my nose. I didn't like any of this. All the new furniture, Eve looking limp and sad, people standing around like Christmas with no presents. None of it seemed right. So even though everyone was staring at me, I shuffled over to Zoe and stood behind her, looking out the windows into the backyard. I think I've offended him by being sick, she said. That was not what I meant at all. My feelings were so complicated. I have difficulty explaining them with any clarity. Even today, after I have lived through it and had time to reflect upon it, all I could do was move to her bedside and lie down before her like a rug. I don't like seeing me like this either, she said. The afternoon was interminable. Finally, the dinner hour came, and Maxwell, Trish, and Denny poured themselves cocktails, and the mood lifted dramatically. An old photo album of Eve as a child was taken out from hiding, and everyone laughed while the smell of garlic and oil floated from the kitchen where Trish cooked the food. Eve took her cap, and we marveled at her shaved head and grotesque scars. She showered with the help of the nurse, and when she emerged from the bathroom in one of her own dresses and not the hospital gown and robe, she looked almost normal, though there was a darkness behind her eyes, a look of resignation. She tried to read Zoe a book, but said she couldn't focus well enough. So, so Zoe tried to read to Eve, and her best was fairly good. I wandered into the kitchen where Denny was again, talking with Trish and Maxwell. We really think Zoe should stay with us, Maxwell said, until Trish echoed, standing at the stove with her back to us. So much of language is unspoken. So much of language is compromised of look. I'm sorry. So much of language is comprised of looks and gestures and sounds that are not words. People are ignorant of the vast complexity of their own communication. Trish's robotic repeating of the single word until revealed everything about her state of mind. Until what? Denny demanded. I could hear the irritation in his voice. How do you know what's going to happen? You're condemning her to something before you even know. I know how that feels. Trish dropped her frying pan onto the burner with a loud clatter and began to sob. Maxwell wrapped his arms around her and enveloped her in his embrace. He looked over at Denny. It must be hard for her too, because that is her mom, and knowing that your daughter's gonna die, an adult, whatever age. Please, Denny, we have to face the reality of it. The doctor said 6 to 8 months. He was quite definite. Trish pulled away from him and steadied herself, sniffed in her tears. My baby, she whispered. Zoe is just a child, Maxwell continued. This is valuable time, the only time she has to spend with Eve. I can't imagine. I can't believe for a second that you would possibly object. You're such a caring person, Trish added. See, but they have something up their sleeve. They're trying to get Zoe. They're trying to take, um, you know, uh, you know what the word is, custody of her. I could see that Denny was stuck. He had agreed to have Eve stay with Maxwell and Trish, and now they wanted Zoe too. If he objected, he would be keeping a mother and a daughter apart. If he accepted their proposal, he would be pushed to the periphery. He would become an outsider in his own family. I understand what you're saying, Denny said. We knew you would, Trish interrupted. But I'll have to talk to Zoe about it to see what she wants. Trish and Maxwell looked at each other uneasily. You can't seriously consider asking a little girl what she wants, Maxwell snorted. She's 5, for God's sake. She can't. I'll talk to Zoe to see what she wants, Denny repeated firmly. After dinner, he took Zoe into the backyard and they sat together on the steps. Mommy would like it if you stayed here with her and Grandma and Grandpa, he said. What do you think about that? She turned it over in her head. What do you think about it? She asked. Well, Denny said, I think maybe it's the best thing. Mommy has missed you so much, and she wants to spend more time with you. It would just be for a little while until she's better and can come home. Oh, Zoe said, I still get to take the bus to school? Well, Denny said, thinking, probably not. Not for a while. Grandma or Grandpa will drive you to school and pick you up, I think. When Mommy feels better, you both will come home, and then you can take the bus again. Oh, I'll come and visit every day, Denny said. and we'll spend weekends together, and sometimes you'll stay with me too. But Mommy really wants you with her." Zoe nodded somberly. "Grandma and Grandpa really want me too. See, she knows. The little girl knows what's going on." Denny was clearly upset, but he was hiding it in a way that I thought little kids didn't understand. But Zoe was very smart, like her father. Even at 5 years old, she understood. "It's okay, Daddy," she said. "I know you won't leave me here forever." He smiled at her and took her little kid hand and held it in his own and kissed her on the forehead. "I promise I will never do that," he said. It was agreed then, perhaps to neither of their satisfaction, that she would stay. I marveled at them both. How difficult it must be to a person to constantly, no, I'm sorry. I marveled at them both. How difficult it must be a person to constantly subvert your desires, to worry about doing the right thing rather than doing what is most expedient. At that moment, honestly, I had grave doubts as to my ability to interact on such a level. I wondered if I could ever become the human I hoped to be. As the night wound down, I found Denny sitting in the stuffed chair next to Eve's bed, nervously tapping his hand against his leg. "This is crazy," Denny said. "I'm going to stay too. I'll sleep on the couch." It is pretty amazing how, this is me talking now, how some unforeseen event can really throw people for a loop. You just weren't expecting it, just not in your plan, you know, not in your plan. "No, Denny," Eve said, "you'll be so uncomfortable. I've slept on plenty of couches in my life. It's fine." "Denny, please." There was something about the tone of her voice, something pleading in her eyes that made him stop. "Please go home," she said. He scratched the back of his neck and looked down. "Zoe is here," he said. "Your folks are here. You've told me you want Enzo to stay with you tonight, but you send me away. What did I do?" She sighed deeply. She was very tired and seemed like she hadn't the energy to explain it to Denny, but she tried. "Zoe won't remember," she said. "I don't care what my parents think. And Enzo, well, Enzo understands. But I don't want you to see me like this." "Like what?" "Look at me," she said. "Okay." 1 second. It's a sad book. "Look at me," she said. "My head is shaved. My face looks old. And my breath smells like I'm rotting inside. I'm ugly." "I don't care what you look like," he said. "I see you. I see who you really are." "I care what I look like," she said, trying to muster. "I know, right? I did. Except I'm not ugly." I'm only kidding. Only kidding. I'm sorry. It's just a sad book. It's sad, it's funny, it's like, "I care what I look like," she said. trying to muster her old Eve smile. When I look at you, I see my reflection in your eyes. I don't want to be ugly in front of you. Denny turned away, as if to shield his eyes from her, as if to take away the mirrors. He looked out the window into the backyard, which was lit with lights along the patio's edge, and more lights that were suspended in the trees, illuminating our lives. Out there, beyond the light, was the unknown, everything that wasn't us. I'll pack Zoe's things and come back in the morning, he said, finally, without turning around. Thank you, Denny, Eve said, relieved. You can take Enzo. I don't want you to feel abandoned. No, he said, Enzo should stay. He misses you. He kissed Eve good night, took Zoe into bed, and then he left me with Eve. I wasn't sure why she wanted me around, but I understood why she wanted Denny to go. As he fell asleep that night, she wanted him to dream of her as she used to be, not as she currently was. She didn't want Denny's vision of her to be corrupted by her presence. What she didn't understand was Denny's ability to look beyond her physical condition. He was focusing on the next turn. Perhaps if she had had the same ability, things would have turned out differently for her. That's pretty profound what the dog is thinking. Like if if even though she's thinking the way she is, and the dog understands it, that the dog also thinks in racing terms, like he always does when he compares life. That if you look at the next turn, that you know, uh, few races are won on the first turn, but many are lost there. So, like, if you give up on that turn, then but you got to have your eyes on the next turn, thinking it might be better. Maybe you'll pick up the time that you lose, the seconds that you lose. The house grew dark and quiet. Zoe in bed, Maxwell and Trish in their room with their TV blinking under the door. Eve was settled into her bed in the living room with the nurse sitting in a dark corner, playing a page of her word search book, in which she circled the hidden messages. I lay next to Eve's bed. Later, Eve was asleep, and the nurse nudged me with her foot. I lifted my head, and she held a finger to her lip and told me to be a good dog and follow her, which I did. She led me through the kitchen, through the laundry room, the back of the house, and she opened the door that led to the garage. In you go, she said. We don't want you disturbing Mrs. Swift through the night. I looked at her, puzzled. Disturb Eve? Why would I do that? She took my hesitation as rebellion. She snatched my collar and gave it a jerk. She shoved me into the dark garage and closed the door. I heard her slippers tread away, back into the house. See, nurses aren't always so nice. Some of them, though, when I've been sick, I'll tell you, the touch of a nurse just makes you feel better. But I've had some personal run-ins with people, and you would think that that would carry over into their personal life. But I wonder if being so compassionate as their job, it's like getting away from your job by being not compassionate. You know what I mean? Like that's their release from work is to be not kind after work as a nurse. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? Some people like to leave work at work, so they leave their compassion there too. I'm not saying that about every nurse, but I'm just saying. Anyway, so she puts the dog into the, yeah, right? Or they just leave it at, maybe they're just so tired of being whatever. I don't know. It's just been some of my experience. That when I'm sick and there's a nurse, I just throw them to pieces. But when I've known nurses in, personally, they're not the nicest people. They're really not. They're not. I've known a few in my life, you know. Uh, so now he's in the garage. I was not afraid. All I knew was how dark it was in the garage. It wasn't too cold, and it wasn't overly unpleasant if you don't mind a concrete floor and the smell of engine oil in an absolutely pitch black room. I always gossip too much. I'm sleeping with who? Gotta wait because of that. Impatient business, right? Yeah, it's like it's their job to be kind. So they look at it like that, and then a lot of them actually smoke too, and they're not. Yeah, it's really crazy that the ones I've known in my personal life or had any dealings with in any kind of a personal, not a work thing, they haven't been all that kind. But the work one, when I'm sick, they're great. The time clicked by, I'm sorry. Um, if you don't mind a concrete floor and the smell of engine oil in an absolutely pitch black room. I'm sure there were no rats, as Maxwell kept a clean garage for his valuable cars. But I had never slept in a garage before. The time clicked by, literally. I watched it click. I watched it click by on an old electric clock that Maxwell kept on the workbench. Remember those? And it would flap down like to change the time and make that little click noise. The old digital clocks, but they weren't really digital. Um, okay. It was one of those old clocks with the numbers on the little plastic tabs that rotate around a spindle, illuminated by a small bulb, the only source of light in the room. Each minute was two clicks. The first when the little plastic half number was released, the second when the half number settled, revealing an entirely new number. Click, click, and a minute went by. Click, click, and another. And that's how I passed my time in my prison, counting the clicks and daydreaming about the movies I've seen. I like how the dog goes into this. He's just passing time. My two favorite actors are, in this order, this is the dog talking, because he's watched a lot of TV. Steve McQueen and Al Pacino. Bobby Deerfield is a very underappreciated film, as is Pacino's performance in it. My third favorite actor is Paul Newman for his excellent car handling skills in the film Winning, and because he is a fantastic racer in his own right and owns a champ car racing team. And finally, because he purchases his palm fruit oil from renewable sources in Colombia and thereby discourages the decimation of vast tracts of rainforest in Borneo and Sumatra. See how smart the dog is? George Clooney is my fourth favorite actor because he's exceptionally clever at helping cure children of diseases on reruns of ER, and because he looks a little like me around the eyes. That's so funny. Who, Paul Newman? Plus, they give all that money to the Paul Newman brand, the dressing and all that. Yeah, he's a good guy. Um, Dustin Hoffman is my fifth favorite actor, mostly because he did such great things for the Alfa Romeo trademark in The Graduate. Steve McQueen, though, is my first, and not only because of Le Mans and Bullet, two of the greatest car movies ever made, but also because of Papillon. I know, right, Adair? I love that. Newman's got Newman, like from Seinfeld. Uh, but also because of Papillon. Being a dog, I know what it's like to be locked in a prison cell without hope every day, waiting for the sliding door to open and for a metal bowl of undernourished slop to be shoved through the slot. Hours into my nightmare, the garage door opened, and Eve was there in her nightgown, silhouetted by, yeah, he's a golden retriever, yeah, silhouetted by the nightlight in the kitchen. Enzo? She questioned. I said nothing, but I emerged from the darkness, relieved to see her again. Come with me. She led me back to the living room, and she took a cushion from the sofa and placed it next to her bed. She told me to lie on it, and I did. Then she climbed into the bed and pulled the sheets up to her neck. I need you with me, she said. Don't go away again. But I hadn't gone away. I had been abducted. I could feel the sleep pressing down on her. I need you with me, she said. I'm so afraid. I'm so afraid. It's okay, I said. I'm here. She rolled to the edge of the bed and looked down at me. Her eyes glazed. Get me through tonight, she said. That's all I need. Protect me. Don't let it happen tonight. Enzo, please. You're the only one who can help. I will, I said. You're the only one. Don't worry about that nurse. I sent her home. I looked over to the corner, and the crinkly old woman was gone. I don't need her, she said. Only you can protect me. Please, don't let it happen tonight. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stood guard, waiting for the demon to show his face. The demon was coming for Eve, but he would have to get past me first, and I was ready. I noted every sound, every creak, every change in air density, and by standing or shifting my weight, I silently made it clear to the demon that he would have to contend with me if he intended to take Eve. The demon stayed away. In the morning, the others awoke and cared for Eve, and I was able to relinquish my guard duties and sleep. What a lazy dog, I heard Maxwell mutter as he passed me, and then I felt Eve's hand on my neck, stroking my neck. Thank you, she said. Thank you. Do you like it? You guys like it? Is it okay? Not bothering you guys, is it? Sorry if I get a little scared up. But do you mind if I go on to chapter 24? Is that okay? Would anybody mind? I'm kind of into it, and like I said, I gotta return the book, so let's just, marathon it. Good, thank you. Yeah, the demon is deaf. Yeah, that's how the dog is looking at it. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. This means a lot to me. Thank you. Ah, you guys make me tear up. Thank you. You guys are so sweet. I'm so sorry. Chapter 24. For the first few weeks of our new arrangement, Denny and I lived in our house, while Eve and Zoe lived with the twins. Denny visited them every single evening after work, while I stayed home alone. By Halloween, Denny's pace had slowed, and by Thanksgiving, he visited them only twice during the week. Whenever he came home from the twins' house, he reported to me how good Eve looked and how much better she was getting, and that she would be coming home soon. But I saw her too, on the weekends, when he would take me to visit, and I knew she wasn't getting better, and she wouldn't be coming home anytime soon. Every weekend, without fail, both Denny and I visited with Eve on Saturday when we picked up Zoe, and again on Sunday when we delivered her home after our sleepover. We frequently took our Sunday meal with the extended family. I spent the occasional night with Eve in her living room, but she never needed me as much as she had that first night when she was so afraid. Zoe's time with us should have been filled with joy, but she didn't seem altogether happy. How could she be, living with her mother, who was dying, and not with her father, who was very much alive? That's a good point. I would think that would be a lot of stress on a little girl, especially when she's just starting school and stuff. One second, I just gotta blow my nose. All right. Zoe's schooling had briefly become a point of contention. Shortly after she began staying with Maxwell and Trish, they asked to transfer Zoe to a school on Mercer Island, as traveling back and forth across the I-90 floating bridge twice a day was a burden for them. But Denny put down his foot, knowing how much Zoe loved her Madrona school. He insisted she remain there, as he was her father and legal guardian. And also, he maintained, since both Zoe and Eve would be moving home in the near future. Frustrated by Denny, Maxwell offered to pay for Zoe's schooling if she enrolled in a private school located on Mercer Island. Their conversations were frequent and intense, but even in the face of Maxwell's persistence, Denny proved that he had a bit of the Gila monster in him. Though I don't know whether on his mother's side or his father's side, as his jaws never slackened. Eventually, he prevailed, and Maxwell and Trish were forced to commute twice daily across the lake. If they're really doing it for Zoe and Eve, Denny said to me once, it shouldn't bother them to drive 15 minutes across the lake. It's really not that far. Denny missed Eve tremendously. I know, but he missed Zoe just as much. I could see it most on those days when he kept Zoe overnight and we got to walk her to her bus stop, usually a Monday or a Thursday. On those mornings, our house seemed filled with electricity, so that neither Denny nor I needed the alarm clock to wake, but instead waited anxiously in the darkness until the hour came to wake Zoe. We didn't want to miss a single minute we could spend with her. On those mornings, Denny was a different person. The way he so lovingly packed her sack lunches, often writing a note on a piece of note paper, a thought or a joke he hoped she would find at lunch and might make her smile. The way he took such care with her peanut butter and banana sandwiches, slicing the banana so that each slice was exactly the same thickness. I got to eat the extra banana on those occasions, which I enjoyed. I love bananas almost as much as I love pancakes, my favorite food. After Zoe drove away on the yellow bus those days, the other father, with the three children, would sometimes offer to buy us a coffee, and sometimes we would accept, and we would all walk to Madison to the nice bakery and drink coffee at the sidewalk table. Until once, when the other father said, your wife works? Obviously, he was trying to explain to himself Eve's absence. No, Denny replied. She's recovering from brain cancer. The man dipped his head sadly upon hearing the situation. After that day, whenever we went to the bus stop, the man made himself busy talking to other people or checking his cell phone. We never spoke to him again. I wonder if that's part of what goes on with me. If people are uncomfortable, and that's why people stop talking. Like, I wonder. I know everybody does their own way and they handle things their own way, they grieve their own way, but I think the same kind of thing sometimes hurt people. And although understandable, just like, her not wanting Denny around, it's painful for people sometimes because it hurts. In February, the Black Pit of Winter, oh, this is chapter 25, sorry guys, of The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. In February, the Black Pit of Winter, we went on a trip to north central Washington. Yeah, everyone is different. You're right, Mr. Lord. To an area called Mathau Valley. It is important for United States citizens to celebrate the birthdays of their greatest presidents, so all the schools were closed for a week. Denny, Zoe, and I went to a cabin in the snowy mountains to celebrate. The cabin was owned by a relative of Eve's whom I had never met. Oh, yeah, this part. I forgot about this. This is bad, you guys. This is like, so bad. Okay, all right. Uh, The cabin was whom I never met. It was quite cold, too cold for me. Though on the warmer afternoons I enjoyed running in the snow, I much preferred to lie by the baseboard heater and let the others do their exercises, skiing and snowshoeing and all of that. Eve, who was too weak to travel, and her parents were not there, but many others were, all of whom were relatives of some kind or another. We were only there, I overheard, because Eve had thought it was very important for Zoe to spend time with these people, since she, Eve said, Eve, someone said, would die very soon. That's so bad when people say that, because people want to have positive thoughts as they're, fighting something or whatever. But, you know, um, it's no different for even somebody who doesn't have a disease that could possibly take your life, because and nobody knows when their day might come. It could be anything. Someone could have something they don't even know they have it, and like a blood clot or something, and go to their brain, an aneurysm. We just don't know. So I think that anybody could say, don't they know they're gonna die soon? Well, we all are. So enjoy every day and tell people that you love them. You know, I always thought that one about buying someone flowers when they're alive, not when they're dead. Um, I didn't like that whole line of reasoning. This is the dog talking. First, that Eve would be dying soon. And second, that Zoe needed to spend time with people she had never met because Eve would soon die. They might have been perfectly pleasant people in their puffy pants and fleece vests and sweaters that smelled of sweat. I don't know. But I wondered why they had waited for Eve's illness to make themselves available for companionship. That's true. That is true. There were a great many of them, and I had no idea who was connected to whom. They were all cousins, I understood, but there was a certain generation gap that was confusing me. And some of the people were without parents, but were with uncles and aunts instead, and some might have just been friends. Zoe and Denny kept mostly to themselves, but they participated in certain group events like horseback riding in the snow, sledding, and snowshoeing. The group meals were nice, and though I was determined to remain aloof, one of the cousins was always willing to slip me a treat at mealtime, and no one ever kicked me out from under the very large dining table where I lingered during dinner, even though I was breaking my own personal code. A certain sense of lawlessness pervaded the house. What, with children staying awake late into the night and adults sleeping at all hours of the day like dogs? Why shouldn't I partake in the debauchery? How you guys doing today? Is everybody doing good? Take a little break here. Is everybody doing good today? I hope everybody had a good day. It's so hot, right? Conflicted though I was, back to the book. Each night, something special happened. Good, Mr. Rourke. I'm glad to hear that. Each night, something special happened that I liked very much. Outside the house, which had many identical rooms, each with many identical beds to house the multitude. Has anybody ever been to something like that where there's like, those houses, people buy them for, vacation houses and they rent them out and they have all these bedrooms that are just filled with these beds and, it's a good deal if you got a lot of people going, but I don't know. I went one time. It was all right, but it was, whatever. I think I enjoyed going to the Cape the best because this one that I was talking about thinking was in oh my god, That's, oh my God. It's somewhere up in Vermont that's really, a ski resort place, but I am not a skier. I'm really not. I have weak ankles. I used to have to wear double bladed ice skates. Did anybody have to do that? And I still couldn't skate. No, I was with my daughter's father. Get lucky. Okay. So there was a stone patio with a large hearth. Apparently, in the summer months, it was used for outdoor cooking, but it was used in the winter as well. I didn't care for the stones, which were very cold and were sprinkled with salt pellets that hurt when they got wedged between my pads. But I loved the hearth fire, cracking and hot. It blazed in the evenings after dinner, and they all gathered, bundled in their great coats, and one had a guitar and gloves without fingertips. And he played music while they all sang. It was well below freezing, but I had my place next to the hearth and the stars we could see, billions of them, because the night was so intensely dark, and the sounds in the distance, the snap of a snowbird and tree branch giving way to the wind, the barking of coyotes, my brethren, calling each other to the hunt. And when the cold overpowered the heat from the hearth, we all shuffled into the house and into our separate rooms, our furs and jackets smelling of smoke and pine sap, not snap, and flaming marshmallows. I haven't toasted a marshmallow in ages. How do you guys like your marshmallows when you toast them? I like mine, I like them real toasty. I'm not a big marshmallow fan, but I like to pull like when you get the black on the outside, I like to pull it off in one piece and eat that. Of course, it doesn't make your teeth look good because you got a bunch of black shit in your teeth. But we all like what we like. It was on one of those evenings, while sitting around the fire, that I noticed Denny. Yeah, burnt. That's how I like him, burnt. That Denny had an admirer. She was young, the sister of someone whom Denny apparently had met years earlier at Thanksgiving or Easter, because his first comment to her and the others was about how much she had grown since he had seen her last. She was a teenager who had a full set of breasts and hips wide enough for childbirthing. The stuff that God thinks, huh? So was, for all intents and purposes, an adult, but who still acted like a child and was always asking for permission to do things. This girl, not yet a woman, was named Annika, and she was very crafty and always knew how to position herself and time her movements to force a meeting with Denny. She sat next to him around the fire. She sat across from him at meals. She always managed to be in the back seat of someone's Suburban when he was in the back seat. She laughed too loudly at every comment he made. She loved his hair after he took off his sweaty ski cap. She proclaimed an extreme admiration for his hands. She doted on Zoe. She became emotional at the mention of Eve. Denny was ignorant of her advances. I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but he certainly acted as if he hadn't a clue. Who is Achilles without his tendon? Who is Samson without Delilah? Who is Oedipus, Oedipus without his club foot? Mute by design, I have been able to study the art of rhetoric unfettered by ego and self interest, and so I know the answers to these questions. The true hero is flawed. The true test of a champion is not whether he can triumph, but whether he can overcome obstacles, preferably of his own making, in order to triumph. A hero without a flaw is of no interest to an audience or to the universe, which, after all, is based on conflict and opposition, the irresistible force meeting the unmovable object, which is also why Michael Schumacher, clearly one of the most gifted Formula One drivers of all time, winner of more races, yeah, only because Ayrton Senna died, winner of more championships, holder of more pole positions than any other driver in Formula One history, is often left off the race fans' list of favorite champions. Yeah, because of Ayrton Senna. He is unlike Ayrton Senna, who often employed the same devious and daring tactics as Schumacher, but did so with a wink, and therefore was called charismatic and emotional, rather than what they call Schumacher, remote and unapproachable. Well, I do things with a wink. They call me unapproachable. Schumacher has no flaws. He has the best car, the best finance team. He has flaws now, that's for sure. The best tires, the most skill. Who can rejoice in his win? True, right? True. People who are perfect, they're always going to win, or at least they'll think they will and convince everybody they do. The sun rises every day. What is to love? Lock the sun in a box. Force the sun to overcome adversity in order to rise. Then we will cheer. Thank you. I will often admire a beautiful sunrise, but I will never consider the sun a champion for having risen, because the sun is supposed to rise, but it's supposed to rise beautifully. So, for me to relate the history of Denny, who is a true champion, without including his missteps and failings, would be doing a disservice to all involved. As the end of the week drew near, the weather reports on the radio changed, and Denny became quite tense. It was almost time to return to Seattle, and he wanted to leave, get back on the highway, and drive the 5 hours over the mountain passes to our house on the other side, which, though cold and dark and wet, was mercifully without 6 feet of base snow and sub-freezing temperatures. He needed to get back to work, he said, and Zoe needed time to adjust to the school schedule, and Annika needed to get back too. This tricky little bitch, Annika. You'll see what happens. A student at the Holy Names Academy, figures, right? Religious. I'm just kidding. Uh, she needed to return so that she could consult with fellow students and prepare some kind of a project they were working on that concerned sustainable living. She spoke of it with urgency, but only after she understood that Denny was planning on heading west before any of the other cousins. Only after she realized that if her needs and Denny's needs coincided, she might win for herself 5 hours next to him in his car, 5 hours of watching his hands hold the steering wheel, 5 hours of seeing his hustled hat head, of inhaling his intoxicating pheromone. Didn't say what. Didn't say what. You didn't say I was unapproachable. Talking about. We talking about Rourke. Hmm. The morning came of our departure came, and the storm had settled in, and the windows of the cabin were pelted with a freezing rain, the like of which I had never experienced. Denny fretted for most of the morning. The radios announced the closure of Stevens Pass because of the storm. Traction devices were required on Snoqualmie Pass. I can't even pronounce it. Rourke didn't leave, did he? Rourke. It's so funny because the next words are stay, stay, but that's the book. It's in the book. That's what they said. The insipid cousins. I hated them all. They smelled rank. Even when they showered, they put on their same sweaters without washing them, and their sour odor returned to them like a boomerang. We ate lunch quickly, and then we left, stopping at a gas station. It's so funny, like the dog got sick of these people after spending that much time with them. Good. I know, right? That says there's only three here now, but it's all right because they can like go back and read anything, right? We stopped at a gas station along the way. Thank you, Ben. Yay! We got Rourke, we got Ben. Who else? Who else? To purchase change for our tires. The drive south was horrific. The freezing rain accumulated on the windshield faster than the wipers could push it away. And every few tedious miles, Denny would stop the car and get out, scrape away the icy glaze. It was dangerous driving, and I didn't like it at all. I rode in the back with Zoe. Annika rode in the front. I could see Denny's hands were gripping the steering wheel far too tightly. In a race car, the hands must be relaxed, and Denny's always are when I see the in-car videos from his races. He often flexes his fingers to remind himself to relax his grip. But for that excruciating drive down the Columbia River, Denny held the wheel in a death grip. I felt very badly for Zoe, who was clearly frightened. The rear of the car moved more suddenly than the front, and so she and I experienced more of the slipping and the sliding sensation generated by the ice. Thinking of how scared Zoe must have been, I worked myself into a state of agitation, and I let myself get carried away. Before I knew it, I was in a full blown panic. I pushed at the windows. I tried to clamber into the front seat, which was totally counterproductive. Denny finally barked, "Zoe, please settle Enzo down." She grabbed me around the neck and held me tightly. I fell against her as she lay back, and she started singing a little song in my ear, one which I remembered from her past. "Hello, little Enzo. So glad to see you." She had just started preschool when she learned that song. She and Eve used to sing it together. I relaxed and let her cradle me. "Hello, little Enzo. So glad to see you." I would like to tell you that I am such a master of my destiny that I contrived the entire situation, that I made myself crazy so Zoe could calm me on this trip and thus would be distracted from her own agitation. Truth be told, however, I have to admit I was glad she was holding me. I was very afraid, and I was grateful for her care. The line of cars trudged steadily but slowly. Many cars were stopped on the side of the road to wait out the storm. Okay, so we're gonna go that I'm gonna skip these two paragraphs because they're just talking about driving on the bad road. And it says after 7 hours of grueling travel and still 2 hours away from Seattle and good driving weather, Denny had Annika call her parents on her cell phone and ask them to find a place for us to stay somewhere near Cle Elum. But they called back soon and told us that all the motels were full because of the storm. We stopped at a McDonald's and Denny purchased food for us to eat. I got chicken nuggets and then we pressed onward to Easton. Yeah, but it's just about the weather. It wasn't, outside Easton, where snow was piled on the sides of the highway. Denny stopped his car alongside dozens of others' cars and trucks in the chain up area and ventured into the freezing rain. He lay down on the pavement and installed the tire chain, which took half an hour. And when he climbed back into the car, he was soaking wet and shivering. "You poor thing," Annika said, and she rubbed his shoulders to warm him. "They're going to close the pass soon," Denny said. "That trucker heard it on the radio." "Can't we wait here?" Annika asked. "They expect flooding. If we don't make it over the pass tonight, we might be stuck for days." It was nasty and horrible, snowy and icy and freezing rain, but we pushed on. our little old BMW chugging up the mountain until we reached the summit where they have the ski lift, and then everything changed. There was no snow, no ice, just rain. We rejoiced in the rain. Shortly, Denny stopped the car to remove the chain, which took another half hour and got him soaking again. And then we were going downhill. The windshield wipers flipped back and forth as quickly as they could, but they didn't help much. The visibility was terrible. Denny held the wheel tightly and squinted into the darkness, and eventually we reached North Bend and then the floating bridge across Lake Washington. It was near midnight. The 5 hour drive had taken more than 10 hours. When Annika called her parents and told them we had made it safely to Seattle, they were relieved. They told her, and she related to us, that the news had reported flash flooding conditions that caused a rock slide closing westbound I-90 near the summit. We must have just missed it, Jenny said. Thank God. Beware the whimsy of fate, I said to myself. She is a mean bitch of a lab. No, no, Annika said into her phone. I'll stay with Denny. He's too exhausted to keep driving, and Zoe is sleeping in the back seat. She should be put to bed. Denny said he's happy to drive me home in the morning. This little. This made Denny turn and look at her questioningly, wondering if he had actually said anything like that. Of course, I knew he hadn't. Annika smiled at him and winked. She ended her call and slipped her phone into her bag. We're almost there, she said, looking ahead out the windshield, her breath shallow with anticipation. Why he didn't take action at that moment. Why he didn't get right back on the freeway and drive up to Edmond where her family lived. Why he said nothing, I'll never know. Perhaps on some level he needed to connect with someone who reminded him of the passion he and Eve used to share. Perhaps. Back at the house, Denny carried Zoe to her room and put her to sleep. He turned on the television and we watched the footage of Snoqualmie Pass being shut down by the authorities. Only for a few days, they predicted, hopefully, though possibly for a week or more. Denny went into the bathroom and took off his wet clothes. He returned wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt. He pulled a beer from the refrigerator and opened it. Can I take a shower? Annika asked. Denny seemed startled. With all of the heroics he had been up to, he had almost forgot about her. He showed her where the towels were, how to work the handheld shower temperature thing, and then he closed the door. He got the extra sheets and pillows and blankets, unfolded the couch in the living room, and made the temporary bed for Annika. When he was done, he went in his bedroom and sat on the end of his own bed. I'm fried, he said to me. And then he fell backward, so he was lying on the bed, his hands on his chest, his feet still on the floor, his knees dangling over the edge of the bed, and the rest of him asleep, even though the lights in the room were still on. I lay on the floor near him and fell asleep as well. I opened my eyes and saw her standing over him. Her hair was wet and she wore Denny's bathrobe. She said nothing. She watched him sleep for several minutes, and I watched her. It was spooky behavior, creepy. I didn't like it. She opened her robe, exposing a sliver of pale white flesh and a tattoo of sunburst encircling her belly button. She didn't speak. She shrugged off her robe and stood naked, her large breast, with her large breast, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Still, he was unconscious, asleep. She reached down and slipped her small hand into the band of his sweatpants. She pulled his pants down to his knees. Don't, he muttered, his eyes still closed. He had driven for more than 10 hours across a harrowing course of snow and ice and flooding. He had nothing left with which to fend off an attack. She pulled his pants down to his ankles, then lifted one foot and then the other to remove them completely. She looked at me. Shoo, she said. Little bitch, right? Sounds like I'm reading a porno novel. I didn't shoo. I was too angry. And yet, I didn't attack either. Something was holding me back. She gave me a dismissive look and turned her attention toward Denny. Don't, he said sleepily. Shh, she soothed. It's all good. I have faith. I will always have faith in Denny. So, so I have to believe what she did to him was without his consent, without his knowledge. He had nothing to do with it. He was a prisoner of his own body, which had no more energy, and she took advantage of him, not of him. Didn't take advantage of the dog. Took advantage of Denny. Still, I could no longer stand by and watch. I'd been in a position to prevent the demon from destroying Zoe's toys, and I failed. I could not fail this new test. I barked sharply, aggressively. I growled. I snapped, and Denny suddenly awakened. His eyes popped open, and he saw the naked girl, and he leapt away from her. What the hell? He shouted. I continued to bark. The demon was still in the room. Enzo, he snapped. That's enough. I stopped barking, but I kept my eye on her in case she were to assault him once again. Where are my pants? Denny asked, frantically standing on the bed. What were you doing? I love you so much, she said. I'm married. It's not like it's having sex. Listen to that shit she said about Eve. She called her it. Oh my God. And she crawled onto the bed, reaching for him, so I barked again. Make the dog go away, she said. Annika, stop. Denny grabbed her wrist. She squirmed playfully. Stop, he shouted. It's getting good. You're so funny, Rourke. Stop, he shouted, jumping off the bed, grabbing his sweatpants from the floor and pulling them on quickly. I thought you liked me, Annika said, her mood abruptly darkening. Annika, I thought you wanted me. Annika, put this on, he said, holding out a robe. I can't talk to a 15-year-old nude woman. It's not legal. You shouldn't be here. I'll take you home. She clutched the robe to herself. But Denny, Annika, please, put on the robe. Denny tightened the strings on his sweatpants. Annika, this isn't happening right now. This isn't something that happened. I don't know what you thought. You, she wailed, and she started crying. You flirted with me all week. You teased me. You kissed me. I kissed you on the cheek, Denny said. It's normal for relatives to kiss on the cheek. It's called affection, not love. But I love you, she howled, and then she was in an all-out crying fit, her eyes squeezed shut, her mouth contorted. I love you, she kept saying over and over. I love you. Jenny was trapped. He wanted to console her, but whenever he moved closer, she dropped her hands, which were clutching the crumpled robe to her chest, and suddenly her massive breasts, heaving with grief, were exposed to him, and he had to retreat. This happened several times, like a funny toy, a monkey with symbols or something. He approached to comfort her. She dropped her hands. Her breast shot out at him, and he flew back. It's possible I was witnessing a living interpretation of an antique pornographic penny bank, similar to one I saw in a movie called The Stuntman, which depicted a bear copulating with a girl on a swing. Really? Wow. Finally, Denny had to put a stop to it. I'm going to leave the room, he said. You will put on the robe and make yourself decent. When you're ready, come into the living room and we can discuss it further. And he turned and he marched away. I followed, and then we waited and we waited and we waited. Finally, she came out wearing the robe, her eyes swollen with tears. She didn't say a word, but she went straight to the bathroom. A few moments later, she emerged, wearing her clothes. I'll take you home, Jenny said. I called my father, Annika said, from the bedroom. Jenny froze. I suddenly sensed apprehension in the room. What did you tell him? He asked. She looked at him for a long time before she answered. If her intention was to make him anxious, it worked. I told him to come pick me up, she said. The bed is too uncomfortable here. Good, Jenny sighed. Good thinking. She didn't respond, but continued to stare at him. If I gave you the wrong impression, I'm sorry, Jenny said, looking away. You're a very attractive woman, but I'm married, and you're so young. This isn't a viable. He trailed off, words not spoken. Affair, she said firmly. Situation, he whispered. She picked up her handbag and her duffel and walked to the foyer. We could all see the headlights when they appeared in the front of the house. Annika threw open the door and jogged down the walk to the street. Jenny and I watched from the doorway as she tossed her bags in the back of the Mercedes, climbed into the front seat. Her father, in his pajamas, waved and then drove away. What do you guys think is going to happen? If anybody's still here, by the way. What do you think is going to happen now? Anybody want me to go on to chapter 26? Did I? Or are you bored? Should I take a break? What do you want to do? What do you think? You let me know. Anybody want me to go on? Awesome. Then I will. Mhm. Chapter 26, The Art of Racing in the Rain. That year we had a cold spell in each winter month. And when the first warm day of spring finally arrived in April, the trees and flowers, oh, you guys, awesome. Okay. The trees and flowers, this dog, oh my gosh, and grasses burst to life with such intensity that the television news had to proclaim an allergy emergency. The drugstores literally ran out of antihistamines. The pharmaceutical companies, those who profit from the misery of others, could have asked for no greater income generating scenario than a cold, wet winter full of flu shots and NyQuil, followed by a hot spring and record breaking pollen count. I believe that people were not so allergic to their environment until they began polluting themselves and their world with so many drugs and toxins. Last chapter was lovely. I could imagine you fucking imagining it. But then nobody asked me. So while the rest of the world was focused on the inconvenience of hay fever, but the dog is right. He says, I believe that people were not so allergic to their environment until they began polluting themselves and their world with so many drugs and toxins. So while the rest of the world was focused on the inconvenience of hay fever, the people in my world had other things to do. Eve continued with the process of dying. Zoe spent too much time with her grandparents, and Denny and I worked at slowing the beating of our hearts so we wouldn't feel so much pain. Still, Denny allowed for an occasional diversion, and that April one presented itself. He had gotten a job offer for one of the racing schools he worked for. They had been hired to provide race drivers for a television commercial, and they asked Denny to be one of the drivers. The race course was in California, a place called Thunder Hill Raceway Park. I knew it was happening in April because Denny talked about it quite a bit. He was very excited, but I had no idea that he planned to drive himself there. A 10-hour trip. And I had even less of an idea that he planned on taking me with him. Oh, the joy. Denny and me in our BMW, driving all day and into the evening like a couple of banditos running from the law, like partners in crime. It had to be a crime to lead such a life as we led, a life in which one could escape one's troubles by racing cars. The drive down wasn't very special. The middle of Oregon is not noted for its scenic beauty, though other parts of Oregon are, and the mountain passes in northern California were still somewhat snowy, which made me cringe with the memory of Annika and how she had taken advantage of Denny. Stunning, absolutely stunning. The vastness of a world so intense with growth and birth in the season of life in the dormant winter and the baking heat of summer. Vast rolling hills covered with newly sprung grass, men working in the land and their tractors. Okay, so they're on their way to that racetrack. That's it, buddy. Okay. The track, relatively new, well cared for, challenging with twists and elevation changes, and so much to look at. The morning after we arrived, Danny took me jogging. We jogged the entire track. He was doing it to familiarize himself with the surface. You can't really see a track from inside a race car traveling at 150 miles per hour or more. He said, you have to get out and feel it. That's what a lot of those the games now, they can familiarize the race car drivers with the track that they're going to be on, which I think is pretty incredible. You know, Denny, because that probably is a obstacle, I would say, for a race car driver to be going to race a track that they've never been on and not know what to expect. That would be pretty scary. Denny explained to me what he was looking for: bumps in the pavement. That no, I have never gone race car, go karting. No, mm-mm. And you know what I don't like is bumper cars. I would always get stuck in the corner, and I couldn't do nothing. I would just get bumped. Visible seams that he might use as braking zone markers or turn-in points. He touched the pavement at the apex of the turns and felt the condition of the asphalt. Were the small stones worn smooth? Could he find better grip slightly off the established racing line? In the corner, like boxed in. Nobody puts a baby in the corner. And there were tricks to the camber of certain turns. Okay, so anyway, here we go. After we had traveled the entire track and studied all 3 miles and 15 turns, we returned to the paddock. Two large semi trucks had arrived. Several men in racing crew uniforms erected tents and canopies and laid out elaborate food service, while other men unloaded six beautifully identical Aston Martin DB5 automobiles, the kind made famous by James Bond. Denny introduced himself to a man who carried a clipboard and walked with the gait of someone in charge. His name was Ken. Thanks for your dedication, Ken said. But you're early. I wanted to walk the track, Denny explained. Feel free. I already did. Thanks. Ken nodded and looked at his watch. It's too early for race engines, he said, but you can take your street exhaust out if you want. Keep it sane. Thanks, Denny said, and he looked at me and winked. We went over to a crew truck, and Denny caught the arm of a crew member. I'm Denny, he said, one of the drivers. The man shook his head and introduced himself as Pat. You've got time, he said. Coffee is over there. I'm going to take my Beamer out for a few easy laps. Ken said it was okay. I was wondering if you had a tie down I could borrow. What do you need a tie down for? Pat asked. Denny glanced at me, and Pat laughed. Hey, Jim, he called to another man. This guy wants to borrow a tie down so he can take his dog for a joyride. They both laughed, and I was a little confused. I have something better, the gym guy said. He went around to the cab of the truck and returned a minute later with a bedsheet. Here, he said, I can always wash it at the hotel if he shits himself. Then he told me to get in the front seat of the car and sit, which I did. They wrapped the sheet over me, pressing me to the seat, leaving only my head sticking out. They somehow secured the sheet tightly from behind. Too tight? Denny asked. I was too excited to reply. He was going to take me out in his car. Take it easy on him until you see if he has a stomach for it, Pat said. Nothing worse than cleaning dog puke out of your vents. You've done this before? Oh, yeah, he said. My dog used to love it. Then he walked around to the driver's side. He took his helmet out of the back seat and squeezed it onto his head. He got in the car and put on his seatbelt. One bark means slower, two means faster. Got it? I barked twice, and that surprised him and Pat and Jim, who were both leaning in the passenger window. He wants to go faster already, Jim said. You got yourself a good dog there. The paddock at Thunderhill Raceway is tucked between two long parallel straights. The rest of the course fans out from the paddock like butterfly wings. We cruised very slowly through the hot pit area to the track entrance. We're going to take it easy, Denny said, and off we went. Being on a track was a new experience for me. No buildings, no signs, no sense of proportion. It was like running through a field, gliding over a plain. Denny shifted smoothly, but I noticed he drove more aggressively than he did on the street. He revved the car much higher, and his braking was much harder. I'm finding my visuals, he explained to me. Turning point, braking. Some guys drive more by feel. They get in a rhythm and trust it. But I'm very visual. It makes me feel comfortable to have references. I already have a dozen reference points on this track, even though I've never driven it. 7 or 8 specific things I've noted on each turn from our track walk. Around the turns we went, he noted his apexes and exits for my benefit. Down the straights, we picked up speed. We weren't going very fast, maybe 60, but I really felt the speed around the turns when the tires made a hollow, ghostly sound, almost like an owl. I felt special being with Denny on the racetrack. He had never taken me on a track before. I felt sure and relaxed. Being held firmly to the seat was comforting. The windows were open and the wind was fresh and cold. I could have driven like that all day. After 3 laps, he looked over at me. Brakes are warm, he said. Tires are warm. I didn't understand what he was getting at. You want to try a hot lap? Well, that's freaking Rourke's favorite phrase. Unless they're just kidding. Try a hot lap. Just kidding, Rookie. A hot lap. I barked twice. Then I barked twice again. Then he laughed. Sing out if you don't like it, he said. One long howl. He firmly pressed the accelerator to the floor. There is nothing like it. The sensation of speed, nothing in the world could compare. It was the sudden acceleration, not Jim's bedsheet, that kept me pinned to the seat as we gathered speed and flew down the first straight. Hold on now, Denny said. We're taking this at speed. Fast we went, hurtling faster. I watched the turn approach, scream at us until we were practically past it, and then he was off the accelerator and hard on the brakes. The nose of the car dove, and then I was thankful for the sheet, because without it, I would have been thrown against the windshield. Slow, slow, slow. The brake pads held the rotors as tightly as they could, burning from the friction, the heat being thrown off the calipers, the energy dissipating, and then he cranked the wheel left and so smoothly, but without pause. He was back on the gas, and we were pushing it through the turn. The G-force was shoving us towards the outside of the car, but the tires holding us in place. They were not hooting, those tires. No. The owl was dead. The tires were screeching. They were shouting, howling, crying in pain. He relaxed on the wheel at the apex, and the car drifted toward the exit, and he was full on the gas, and we flew out of that turn, and toward the next, and the next after that. 15 turns at Thunderhill. 15. And I love them all equally. I adore them all. Each one is different, each one with its own particular sensation, but each so magnificent. Around the track we went, faster and faster, lap after lap. You okay? He asked, looking at me as we sped nearly 120 miles per hour down the back straight. I barked twice. I'm going to use up my tires if you keep me out here, he said. One more lap. Yes, one more lap. One more lap. Forever. One more lap. I live my life for one more lap. I give my life for one more lap. Please, God, please give me one more lap. And that lap was spectacular. I lifted my eyes as Denny instructed. Big eyes, far eyes, he said to me. Those reference points, the visuals he had identified when we walked the track, moved by so quickly it took me some time to realize that he was not even seeing them. He was living them. He had programmed the map of the race course into his brain, and it was there, like a GPS system. When we slowed for a turn, his head was up and looking at the next turn, not at the apex of the turn we were driving. The turn we were in was simply a state of existence for Denny. It was where we were, and he was happy to be there, and I could feel the joy emanating from him, the love of life. But his attention and his intention was far ahead, to the next turn and the one beyond that. With every breath he adjusted, he reassessed, he corrected, but he did it all subconsciously. I saw then how in a race he could plot now how to pass another driver 3 or 4 laps later. His thinking, his strategies, his mind, all of Denny unfolded for me that day. After a cool down lap, we pulled into the paddock and the entire crew was waiting. They surrounded the car and their hands released me from my harness and I leapt to the tarmac. Did you like it? One of them asked me, and I barked. Yes, I barked and jumped high in the air. You were hauling ass out there, Pat said to Denny. We got a real racer on the set. Well, Enzo barked twice, Denny explained with a laugh. 2 barks means faster. They laughed, and I barked twice again. Faster. The feeling, the sensation, the movement, the speed, the car, the tires, the sound, the wind, the track surface, the apex, the exit, the shift point, the braking zone, the ride. It's all about the ride. There is nothing more to tell about that trip because nothing could possibly be more incredible than those few hot laps that Denny gave to me. Until that moment, I thought that I loved racing. I intellectualized that I would enjoy being in a race car. Until that moment, I didn't know. How could anyone know until he sits in a car at race speed and takes turns at the limit of adhesion, breaks a hair from lockup, the engine begging for the red line? I floated through the rest of our trip. I dreamed of going out again at sea, but I suspected, as it turned out, correctly so, that more track time for me was unlikely. Still, I had my memory, my experience. I could relive in my mind again and again. 2 barks means faster. Sometimes, to this day, in my sleep, I bark twice because I am dreaming of Denny driving me around Thunder Hill, the two of us laying down a hot lap, and I bark twice, say faster. One more lap, Denny, faster. It's convertible. Yep. So how do you guys like it so far? So again, anybody still hanging with me? Wondering, is it all right? We are like halfway through, more than exactly looks like maybe a little more than halfway through. We're at chapter. What chapter was that? Okay, so I just read chapter 26. So that's so maybe in a little while I'll come back on and go from chapter 26, unless you guys want me to keep reading. But that's up to you. Like if there's like I see it says three, so if there's like these three people that are like hanging on, and you guys want me to keep reading, I will. If not, we'll take a break or whatever. They're really good books. I really love the dog. Hey, do you like it? Is that thumbs up for taking a break or for just keep going? Baby, I'm a want you. Hey, all right, stop, stop. Jeez, maybe I'll put my dog out on a race card. Make him go. Or make him go. Rough, rough, buddy. Stop it. Keep reading. All right. And I'll keep reading. All right. I'm so glad that you guys are still here liking it. That's good. That's cool. I appreciate it. Really, I do. You know, I'm an emotional person. So, all right. Let's do it. How are you today, you guys? Last over but how are you, Ben? I know how Mr. Work is. How are you doing today, Ben? Good. Anybody else here? You guys doing good? Says there's a third person. I don't know who it is, but as long as you're enjoying the story, then that's awesome. If Roscoe wrote a book, he would say, "My mother is so boring." My mother is so boring. All right, I'm gonna go on to chapter 27. Un momento, por favor. Oh yeah, you're just smoking a little while you're watching, while you're listening. Cool, that's awesome. Awesome. You should put some black velvet. Oh no, when you drink, you can't eat. Black velvet in your coffee though is awesome. You should try it out. So good. Black velvet is so smooth. All right, going on to chapter 27. The Art of Racing in the Rain by God Stein. Red sung that. I love Red. 6 months came and 6 months left, and Eve was still alive. Then 7 months, then eight. On the first day of May, Denny and I were invited to the twins, which that's what Enzo calls his, you know, Eve, Eve's parents, were invited to their house for dinner, which was unusual because it was a Monday night, and I never went with Denny on a weeknight visit. We stood awkwardly in the living room with the empty hospital bed while Tricia Maxwell prepared dinner. Eve was absent. I wandered down the hallway to investigate, and I found Zoe playing quietly by herself in her room. Her room in Maxwell and Tricia's house was much larger than her room at home, and it was filled with all the things a little girl could want: dolls and toys and frilly bed skirts and clouds painted on the ceiling. She was immersed in her dollhouse and didn't notice me enter. I spotted a sock ball on the floor, which must have fallen when the clean clothes were being loaded into her dresser. and I pounced on it. I playfully dropped it at Zoe's feet, nudged it with my nose, and then dropped down to my elbows, leaving my haunches tall and my tail upright. Universal sign language for let's play. But she ignored me. So I tried again. I snatched up the socks, flung them in the air, batted them with my nose, retrieved them for myself, and dropped them again at Zoe's feet. And downwardly I faced. I was all prepared for a fun game of no fetch. She wasn't. She pushed the sock aside with her foot. I barked expectantly, one last attempt. She turned and looked at me seriously. That's a baby game, she said. I have to be grown up now. My little Zoe, a grown up at her tender age? A sad thought. Disappointed, I walked slowly to the door and looked back at her over my shoulder. Some things bad, sometimes bad things happen, she said to herself. Sometimes things change, and we have to change too. She was speaking someone else's words, and I'm not sure she believed them or even understood them. Perhaps she was committing them to memory because she hoped they would hold the key to her uncertain future. I returned to the living room and waited with Denny until finally Eve emerged from the hallway where the bedroom and the bathrooms were. The nurse, who spent her breaks obsessively knitting with metal needles that drove me mad, helped Eve walk, and Eve was brilliant. She was wearing a gorgeous dress, long and navy blue and cut just so. She wore the lovely string of small freshwater pearls from Japan that Denny had given her for their 5th anniversary, and her makeup and her hair, which had grown enough so she could arrange it into some kind of hairdo, was done that way, and she was beaming. Even though she needed help for her runway walk, she was walking the runway, and Denny gave her a standing ovation. Today is the first day I am not dead, Eve said to us, and we're having a party. To live every day as if it had been stolen from death. That is how I would like to live. To feel the joy of life as Eve felt the joy of life. To separate oneself from the burden, the angst, the anguish that we all encounter every day. To say, I am alive. I am wonderful. I am. I am. That is something to aspire to. When I am a person, that is how I will live my life. The party was festive. Everyone was happy, and those who were not happy pretended that they were, with such conviction that we were all convinced. Even Zoe came alive with her usual humor, apparently forgetting for a time her need to be a grown up. When the hour came for us to leave, Denny kissed Eve deeply. I love you so much, she said. I wish you could come home. I want to come home, she replied. I will come home. She was tired, so she sat on the sofa and called me to her. I let her rub my ears. Denny was helping Zoe get ready for her bedtime, while the twins, for once, were keeping a respectful distance. I know Denny's disappointed, she said to me. They're all disappointed. Everyone wants me to be the next Lance Armstrong. And if I could just grab it and hold it in front of me, maybe I could be. But I can't hold it, Enzo. It's bigger than me. It's everywhere. In the other room, we could hear Zoe playing in the bath, Denny laughing with her, as if they had no worries in the world. I shouldn't have allowed it to be this way, she said regretfully. I should have insisted on going home so we could all be together. That's my fault. I could have been stronger. But Denny would say we can't worry about what's already happened. Please take care of Denny and Zoe for me, Enzo. They're so wonderful when they're together. She shook her head to rid herself of sad thoughts and looked down at me. Do you see? She asked. I'm not afraid of it anymore. I wanted you with me before because I wanted you to protect me, but I'm not afraid of it anymore because it's not the end. She laughed the Eve laugh that I remembered. But you knew that, she said. You know everything. Not everything, but I knew she had been right about her situation. While doctors are able to help many people, for her, they could only tell her what couldn't be done. And I knew that once they identified her disease for her, once everyone around her accepted her diagnosis and reinforced it and repeated it back to her time and again, there was no way she could stop it. The visible becomes inevitable. Your car goes where your eyes go. Now, I just want people, I want to reflect on that, what he just said. I notice a lot of times people will say things like, as if it's some kind of bad behavior of mine, that I haven't been updating much on my own situation. Uh, so, you know, they all just keep saying terminal or whatever anyway. So, just so that everybody knows, Tiffany was not the first one to call me terminal, by the way, so everyone knows that. And it wasn't a doctor either. The person who did it knows, but I feel they did it by accident, but just so people know, Tiffany wasn't the first one to use that. But here's the reason why I don't give updates now is exactly because of that paragraph. Because they there's people out there who, rather than wanting to reinforce and repeat, the positive, they want to keep repeating and reinforcing negative. So I don't listen to them or look, or I just kind of laugh at them saying that, because I will no longer give them anything to provide any nutrients to their negative prayers for me. Okay? People who want to keep repeating that the glass is half empty and saying that I'm terminal, as opposed to, saying, well, she looks pretty good and she has a positive outlook. So, basically everybody's terminal. We're all going to die. Instead of them looking at it like, in the best way possible, everything they say is ugly anyway. So I'm not going to share that kind of information with people who are hoping to add, whatever negative words can be, you know, whatever negative sentence, or, something just to put out into the atmosphere that they can find. So, for people who are my friends and they want to know, you can ask me and I'll tell you. But, you know, privately, because all I want to think is just that this glass is half full. Okay. We took our leave, Denny and I. I didn't sleep in the car on the ride home as I usually do. I watched the bright lights of Bellevue and Medina flicker by, so beautiful, crossing the lake on the floating bridge and seeing the glow of Madison Park and the buildings of downtown peeking out. If I ever find myself before a firing squad, I will face my executioners without a blindfold, and I will think of Eve, of what she said. It is not the end. She died that night. Her last breath took her soul. I saw it in my dream. I saw her soul leave her body as she exhaled, and then she had no more need, no more reason. She was released from her body and being released. She continued her journey elsewhere, high in the firmament where soul material gathers and plays out all the dreams and joys of which we temporal beings can barely conceive, all the things that are beyond our comprehension, but even so are not beyond our attainment if we choose to attain them and believe that we truly can. I'm going to go on to chapter 28, you don't mind. In the morning, Denny didn't know about Eve, and I, having awakened in a fog from my dream, barely suspected. He drove me over to Luther Bearbank Park on the eastern shore of Mercer Island. Since it was a warm spring day, it was a good choice of dog park, as it afforded lake access, so Denny could throw the ball and I could swim after it. The park was empty of other dogs. We were by ourselves. Well, thank you, Mr. Rourke. I appreciate that. We'll move her back home, Denny said to me as he threw the ball. And Zoe, we should all be together. I miss them. I swam out into Cold Lake and retrieved the ball. This week, he said. This week, I'll bring both of them home. And he threw the ball again. I waded over the rocky bottom until my body gained buoyancy, and then I paddled out to the ball, bobbed for it in the lake, and returned. When I dropped the ball at Denny's feet and looked up, I saw that he was on his cell phone. After a moment, he nodded and hung up. She's gone, he said, and then he sobbed loudly and turned away, crying into the crook of his arm so I couldn't see. I am not a dog who runs away from things. I had never run away from Denny before that moment, and I have never run away since. But in that moment, I had to run. There was something about it. I don't know. The setting of the dog park, perched on the eastern bank of Mercer Island like that, so ready. The split rail fence, not a containment fence in any way. The entire scene begs for a dog to run, to flee from his captivity, to lash out against the establishment. And so I ran. Off to the south, I burst off down the short path through the gap in the split rail and onto the big field. Then I broke west, over the asphalt path and down the other side to the amphitheater. I found what I was looking for, untamed wilderness. I needed to go wilding. I was upset, sad, angry, something. I needed to do something. I needed to feel myself, understand myself and this horrible world we are all trapped in, where bugs and tumors and viruses worm their way into our brains and lay their putrid eggs that hatch and eat us alive from the outside, from the inside out. Sorry. I needed to do my part to crush it, stamp out what was attacking me, my way of life. So I ran. The twigs and vines whipped my face. The rough earth hurt my feet. But I ran until I saw what I needed to see. A squirrel, fat and complacent, eating from a bag of Fritos, stupidly shoving chips into its mouth. And I found in the darkest part of my soul a hatred I had never felt before. I don't know where it came from, but it was there. And I charged that squirrel. It looked up too late. It noticed me long after it should have. It had wanted to live, and I was on it. I was on that squirrel, and it had no chance. I was ruthless. My jaws snapped down on it, cracking its back. My teeth ripped into its fur, and I shook it to death after that for good measure. I shook it until I heard its neck snap in two, and then I ate it. I ripped it open with my fangs, my incisors tore into it, and blood was on me, all the blood, hot and rich. I drank its life, and I ate its entrails, and pulverized its bones and swallowed. I had to do it. I missed Eve so much I couldn't be a human anymore and feel the pain that humans feel. I had to be an animal again. I devoured, I gorged, I gulped. I did all the things I shouldn't have done. My trying to live to human standards had done nothing for Eve. I ate the squirrel for Eve. I slept in the bushes. Sometimes later, Sometime later I emerged myself again. Denny found me and he said nothing. He led me to the car. I got in the back seat and fell asleep again immediately, with the taste of blood from the squirrel I had murdered fresh in my mouth. I slept, and while I slept, I dreamed of the crows. I chased them. I caught them. I killed them. I did it for Eve. Chapter 29. For Eve, her death was the end of a painful battle. For Denny, it was the beginning. What I did in the park was selfish because it was about satisfying my basic needs. It was also selfish because it prevented Denny from going to Zoe right away. He was angry with me for having delayed him in the park, but to postpone, even for a short time, what he was to find at the home of the twins might have been the most merciful thing I could have done for him. When I awoke from my slumber, we were at Maxwell and Trish's house. In the driveway was a windowless white van with a fleur-de-lis insignia on the driver's door. Denny parked in such a way as to not block the vehicle, and then he led me around the side of the house to the hose in the back. He turned on the hose and rinsed the blood from my muzzle in a rough and joyless manner. It was not a bath, it was a scrubbing. "What did you get into out there?" he asked me. When I was cleaned of dirt and blood, he released me and I shook myself dry. He went to the French doors on the patio and knocked. After a moment, Trish appeared. She opened the door and embraced Denny. She was crying. After a long time, during which Maxwell and Zoe also appeared, Denny ended the embrace and asked, "Where is she?" Trish pointed. "We told them to wait for you," she said. Denny stepped into the house, touching Zoe's head as he passed. After he disappeared, Trish looked at Maxwell. "Let him have a minute," she said. And they, with Zoe, stepped outside and closed the French doors so that Denny could be alone with Eve for the last time, even though she was no longer living. In the emptiness that was all around me, I noticed an old tennis ball in the plantings. I picked it up and dropped it at Zoe's feet. I didn't know what I was doing, if I had a specific intention. Was I trying to lighten the mood? I don't know, but I felt I had to do something. So there the ball bounced to stop at her bare feet. She looked down at a ball but did nothing with it. Maxwell noticed what I had done, and he noticed Zoe's lack of reaction. He picked up the ball and with a mighty heave threw it so far into the woods behind the house that I lost sight of it and could only barely hear it crash through the leaves of bushes on its way back to earth. It was quite an impressive toss, the pale tennis ball sailing through the air against the clear blue sky. What amount of psychic pain was expended on that ball, I had no idea. "Fetch, boy," Maxwell said to me sarcastically, and then he turned back to the house. I didn't fetch, but waited with them until Denny returned. When he did, he went to Zoe immediately, picked her up, and held her tightly. She squeezed his neck. "I'm so sad," he said. "Me too." He sat on one of the deck chairs with Zoe on his knee. She buried her face in his shoulder and stayed like that. "The people from Bonnie Watson will take her now," Trish said. "We'll bury her with our family. It's what she wanted." "I know," he said, nodding. "When?" "Before the end of the week." "What can I do?" Trish looked at Maxwell. "We'll take care of the arrangements," Maxwell said. "But we do want to speak with you about something." Then he waited for Maxwell to continue, but he didn't. "You haven't eaten breakfast, Zoe," Trish said. "Come with me and I'll fix you an egg." Zoe didn't budge until Denny tapped her shoulder and nudged her off his lap. "Go get some food with Grandma," he said. Zoe obediently followed Trish into the house. When she was gone, Denny leaned back with his eyes closed and sighed heavily. His face lifted to the sky. He stayed like that for a long time, minutes. He was a statue. While Denny was immobile, Maxwell shifted his weight from one foot to the other and back. Several times Maxwell began speaking, but stopped himself. He somehow seemed reluctant. "I knew it was coming," Denny said finally, his eyes still closed. "But still, I'm surprised." Maxwell nodded to himself. That's what concerns Trisha and me, he said. Denny opened his eyes and looked at Maxwell. Concerns you? He asked, taken aback. That you haven't made preparations. Preparations? You have no plan. Plan? You keep repeating the last thing I've said, Maxwell observed after a pause. Because I don't understand what you're talking about, Denny said. That's what concerns us. Denny, still sitting, leaned forward and screwed up his face at Maxwell. What exactly are you concerned about, Maxwell? He asked. Then Trish was there. Zoe is eating an egg and toast and watching TV in the kitchen, she announced. She looked at Maxwell expectantly. We've just started, Maxwell said. Oh, Trish said. I thought, well, what have you said so far? Why don't you take it from the top, Trish? Denny said. Maxwell is having some difficulty with the opening. You're concerned? Trish glanced around, apparently disappointed that their concerns hadn't already been resolved. Well, she began, Eve's passing is obviously a terrible tragedy. Hi, Teddy. We're just reading about a dog. Eve's passing is obviously a terrible tragedy. Still, we've been anticipating it for many months. Maxwell and I have discussed at great length our lives, the lives of all of us, in the aftermath of Eve's death. We discussed it with Eve as well, just so you know, and we believe that the best situation for all parties involved would be for us to have custody of Zoe, to raise her in a warm and stable family situation, to provide her with the kind of upbringing and, well, not to be gosh, but privileges we can provide for her. We think it will be best. We hope you understand that this is in no way a commentary on you as a person or your fathering abilities. It is simply what is in Zoe's best interest. Denny looked from one of them to the other, a perplexed look still on his face, but he said nothing. I was perplexed too. It was my understanding that Denny had allowed Eve to live with the twins so that they could spend time with their dying daughter, and that he had allowed Zoe to live with the twins so she could spend time with her dying mother. As I understood it, once Eve died, Zoe would be with us. The idea of a transition period made some sense to me. Eve had died the previous night. To spend the following day or even a few days with her grandparents made sense. But custody? What do you think? Trish asked. You can't have custody of Zoe, Denny said simply. Maxwell sucked in his cheeks, crossed his arms, and tapped his fingers against his biceps, which were clad in a dark polyester knit. I know this is hard for you, Trish said, but you have to agree that we have the advantage of parental experience, available free time, and fiscal abundance that will ensure Zoe's education through whatever level she might choose to pursue, and a large home in a safe neighborhood that has many young families and many children her age. Denny thought for a moment. You can't have custody of Zoe, he said. I told you, Maxwell said to Trish. If you could just sleep on it, Trish said to Denny, I'm sure you will see that what we're doing is right. It's best for all. You can pursue your racing career. Zoe can grow up in a loving and supportive environment. It's what Eve wanted. How do you know that? Denny asked. She told you? She did. But she didn't tell me. I don't know why she wouldn't have, Trish said. She didn't, Denny said firmly. Trish forced a smile. Will you sleep on it? Will you think about what I've said? It will be much easier. No, no, I will not sleep on it, Denny said, rising from the chair. You can't have custody of my daughter. final answer. The twins sighed simultaneously. Trish shook her head in dismay. Maxwell reached into his back pocket and removed a business envelope. We didn't want it to have to be this way, he said, and he handed the envelope to Denny. What's this? Denny asked. Open it, Maxwell said. Denny opened the envelope and removed several sheets of paper. He glanced at them briefly. What does this mean? He asked again. I don't know if you have a lawyer, Maxwell said, but if you don't, you should get one. We're suing for custody of our granddaughter. Denny flinched like he had been punched in the gut. He fell back into the deck chair, his hands still clinging to the document. I finished my egg, Zoe announced. None of us had noticed her return, but there she was. She climbed onto Denny's lap. Are you hungry? She asked. Grandma can make you an egg too. No, he said apologetically. I'm not hungry. She thought a moment. Are you still sad? She asked. Yes, he said after a pause. I'm still very sad. Me too, she agreed, and she laid her head on his chest. Denny looked at the twins. Maxwell's long arm hung on Trish's narrow shoulders like some kind of a heavy chain. And then I saw something change in Denny. I saw his face tighten with resolve. Zoe, he said, standing her up, you run inside and pack your things, okay? Where are we going? She asked. We're going home now. Zoe smiled and started off, but Maxwell stepped forward. Zoe, stop right there, he said. Daddy has some errands he has to run. You'll stay with us for now. How dare you, Denny said. Who do you think you are? I'm the one who's been raising her for the past 8 months, Maxwell said, his jaw set. What a jerk, right? Jerk. Zoe looked from her father to her grandfather. She didn't know what to do. No one knew what to do. It was a standoff, and then Trish stepped in. Run inside and put your dolls together, she said to Zoe, while we talk a little more. Zoe withdrew reluctantly. Let her stay with us, Denny, Trish pleaded. We can work this out. I know we can work it out. Let her stay with us while the lawyers come up with some kind of compromise. You were fine with her staying here before. You begged me to let her stay here, Denny said to her. I'm sure we can work this out. No, Trish, he said. I'm taking her home with me. And who is going to take care of her when you're at work? Maxwell snapped, shaking with anger. When you're off at your races for days at a time, who will take care of her if, God forbid, she were to get sick? Or would you just ignore it, hide it from the doctors until she was on the verge of death, like you did with Eve? I didn't hide Eve from the doctors. Have you been listening, Darklight? And yet she never saw anyone. She refused, Denny cried out. She refused to see anyone. You could have forced her, Maxwell shouted. No one could force Eve to do anything Eve didn't want to do, Denny said. And I certainly couldn't. Maxwell clenched his fists tightly. The tendons in his neck bulged. And that's why she's dead, he said. What? Denny asked incredulously. This is a joke. I'm not continuing this conversation. He glared at Maxwell and started towards the house. I regret the day she met you, Maxwell muttered after him. Denny stopped at the door and called inside. Zoe, let's go now. We can stop by later to get your dog. Zoe emerged, looking confused, holding an armful of stuffed animals. Can I take these? She asked. Yes, honey, but let's go now. We'll come back later for the rest. Denny ushered her toward the path that led around to the front of the house. You're going to regret this, Maxwell hissed at Denny as he passed. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Let's go, Enzo, Denny said. We walked around to the driveway and got into our car. Maxwell followed us and watched Denny strap Zoe into her car seat. Denny started the engine. You're going to regret this, Maxwell said again. Mark my words. Denny pulled, right? Exactly. Denny pulled the driver's seat closed with a slam that shook the car. Do I have a lawyer? He said to himself. I work at the most prestigious BMW and Mercedes service center in Seattle. Who does he think he's dealing with? I have a good relationship with all the best lawyers in this town, and I have their home phone number. We pulled out of the driveway with a spray of gravel at Maxwell's feet, and as we took off up the idyllic, twisty Mercer Island road, I couldn't help but notice that the white van was gone, and with it, Eve. Should I go on to chapter 30? It's only a page long, chapter 30. Wow, we're cruising through, huh? We started at chapter 17. Oh, we have to go on because we do 13 chapters. We gotta break that number, right? Chapter 30. With experience, a driver adjusts his understanding of how a car feels when it's near its limit. Thank you, Dark Light. I like the way they use the symbolic driver references too for life. I like that. With experience, a driver adjusts his understanding of how a car feels when it's near its limit. A driver becomes comfortable driving on the edge. So when his tires begin to lose adhesion, he can easily correct, pause, and recover. Knowing where and when he could push for a little extra becomes ingrained in his being. When the pressure is intense and the race is only half completed, a driver who is being chased relentlessly by a competitor realizes that he might be better off pushing from behind than pulling from the front. In that case, the smart move is to yield his lead to the trailing car and let the other driver pass. Relieved of his burden, our driver can tuck in behind and make the new leader drive his mirror. So that means that the new leader has to keep looking in their rearview mirror and they'll ride their ass. Sometimes, however, it is important to hold one's position and not allow the pass. For strategic reasons, psychological reasons, sometimes a driver simply has to prove that he is better than his competition. See, that's the way I like it, right? Racing is about discipline and intelligence, not about who has the heavier foot. The one who drives smart will always win in the end. So, uh, chapter 31, or I can stop now and finish it at another time if everybody's had it. But it does kind of fly by, doesn't it? I mean, well, it's been 2 hours and 45 minutes actually. So, you know what? I will take a break and then we'll do chapter 31. So, remember, everybody, that her parents are trying to take custody and he took Zoe. Eve passed away. So, and always remember that incident with that cousin too, Annika. That's going to come back into play. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it so much, so much. Thank you, Mr. Rourke. I know you mean bravo. Thank you. Love you guys so much. Bye. Peace, love, and tacos. Keep your eye on the next turn.